Reading with your kids.
Hola, ni hao, konnichiwa, assalamu alaikum, shalom, mahaba, moni wanji, namaste, jambo, bienvenidos, happy Easter. Hi, my name is Jedley, and this is the Reading with Your Kids podcast. We are coming to you from the beautiful neighborhood of Reedville in the southwest corner of Boston, Massachusetts. We are so delighted and so honored that you are joining us in our mission to help families grow closer to reading. Please be sure to subscribe to the show on the iHeartRadio app, on Spotify, Amazon Music, Apple Podcasts, wherever you find your podcast. Our guest today is the director of the LBGTQ outreach for the Diocese of Lexington in Kentucky. He is the author of Coming Out and Coming Home. His name is Stan J.R. Zerkowski. Join us right now from the beautiful city of Lexington in Kentucky. And if you ever have a chance to visit, I strongly recommend you do. It is a beautiful, beautiful city, and the people are wonderful as well. Our guest today is the author of Coming Out and Coming Home. Please welcome to the show, Stan J.R. Zerkowski. Hey, Stan, how are you?
Very good. Thank you for having me. And I'm glad that you gave such a good plug to the Bluegrass, because we are hospitable people, we are welcoming people, we are a diverse people, and we are a creative and loving people. So for all your listeners, come to the Bluegrass. Anybody that loves horses can't be bad. We love our thoroughbreds. So come, we'll love you too.
One of the things that I didn't do in the introduction was give the subtitle of your book. And I'm going to ask you to do that in a moment. But I think a lot of people listening might assume correctly that coming out is referring to you coming out about your sexuality. What people may not be as familiar with is the phrase of the term coming home, which is something Catholics and Catholic dioceses throughout the nation and maybe the world started using to invite people who felt alienated or left out or excluded from the church to come home, to let them know that they were welcome. So with that, can you also remind us of the subtitle of your book? Because it is quite a mouthful.
Sure. Yeah, Coming Out and Coming Home, a gay Catholic man's journey from marginalization to ministry, with a few miracles along the way.
Well, I can't wait to hear about a couple of the miracles. But I think first, I was sharing with JR before the show that in the 5 years, the 1,300 plus episodes that we have published here on the Reading with Your Kids podcast, I've never had anything but praise or wonderful comments made on social media to our inbox, except for the episode that featured Father James Martin, who wrote a book about when we pray. But Father Martin is also a very vocal supporter of the LBGTQ community. And for that, because he was on the show, I received an awful lot of very vicious, cruel, and very un-Jesus-like comments about his appearance and about his support for the community. And that was all coming from Catholics. I'm ashamed to say, because I'm a Catholic and I don't agree with everything that has gone on in our church. There's certainly lots of mistakes that have been made. But I think overall it's a community, a family of people that have done some great things in the world and can do even greater things in the world. And when my fellow Catholics are showing so much hate, it just distresses me, because we're supposed to be all about love.
Yeah, nothing evokes such intense, I think, feelings, such intense reactions as the ministry that both Father Martin and I and others are engaged in. Sadly and tragically, I think there is a propensity to both assuming a sin and creating language that refers to others as sin.
Mm.
And I find that happening in my travels and my years of ministry here with the LGBTQ community. Father Martin, as a Jesuit priest, obviously adheres to Catholic teaching, Catholic social teaching, and to the gospel. I mean, that's what he's based his life on. I try to do the same thing. I try to emulate Father Martin in a lot of ways. He's a good friend of mine and a mentor, a confidant as well. The sad thing is that our ministry does bring out less than Christian behavior, less than the behavior I think Jesus would expect from people. And, I think we just have to keep in mind that we don't vilify those people either.
Mm-hmm.
I think the reason why, at least the reason I find out why, is because people believe stereotypes and people believe ideas, and they don't get to know LGBTQ persons. Pope Francis always talks about a church that's a field hospital, and that we should be a church of accompaniment. If we're accompanying one another, that means that we're learning about one another. We're standing side by side, we're praying side by side, we're working side by side with one another, and we get to know each other. When we get to know each other, a lot of that fear, a lot of that bias, a lot of those ideas, ideologies that sometimes clog our capacity to see clearly and to love, they fall. And we see what God sees, the image of Jesus in one another. And I think, those Catholics and those people that get all upset, I used to get upset too. I used to get a bad stomachache every time that would come my way. I tell you, I spent many a sleepless night at the beginning of this ministry. It would affect me so deeply. Now it doesn't affect me too deeply. I think I just sort of think, gosh, I wish we could just learn one another. We could believe each other's stories. We don't have to agree on everything, that's for certain. We don't have to agree on everything, to walk with one another, to work with one another, to dialogue with one another. Dialogue doesn't mean I'm convincing you of anything and you're convincing me of anything. It means that we're both sharing. And hopefully with dialogue, there's also discernment of how to be a better Catholic, how to be a better person, how to walk with one another in that spirit of accompaniment, in that spirit of encounter that the Church, that the Gospels, and that the Pope has called us to. So I hope, for your sake, that I don't cause the same reactions that Father Martin has. But if I do, praise God, because that means that people at least are listening. And that's the first step. That's the very first step in getting to know someone else and beginning to understand their story and maybe having a conversion of heart where we can see God's image in another that we may not understand.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Tell us about your story.
Sure. Well, I'm a product of Catholic education all the way through. Catholic grade school, Catholic high school, Catholic university, seminary. I was a Franciscan friar for a while. And I had my entire career within the Catholic Church, as a liturgist, as a musician, as a director of development and outreach. I grew up in Buffalo, New York, which I call the area that I grew up in Polish ghetto, because you walk down the street, people's windows were open, or you heard the radio playing, you heard the Polish language. Everybody knew everybody else. Everybody took care of each other's kids. Everybody knew your parents. Everybody knew your family. So everybody was like family to you. So it was idyllic, pretty much. And my education in the grade school was terrific too. I remained friends with my principal, Sister Susan, until her death in the year 2000, and I think it was 13 or 15. My entire life, the priests that taught me, that were young priests then and deacons, I remained friends with them for 50 years, for my entire life. So it was great. It was terrific. The older that I got through high school and when I left for the Franciscan friars, the more I was realizing that the church I loved, and that the church, like I just said, that was sort of an idyllic situation, was an idyllic place for me to thrive and to grow, might not feel the same way about me if they knew who I was. Now, mind you, this was in the 80s and 70s. It's very different time. We weren't discussing things like this. We barely said the word pregnant.
Mm-hmm.
We'd say, expecting, I don't know what, expecting. So there were certain things that we were not talking about. And one of which was the issue of homosexuality, or let alone LGBTQ. I don't think those letters were even spoke. At least I wasn't aware. Mm-hmm. Now, I must say this, though, that I think others knew before I did that I was gay, especially in high school. And it just wasn't an issue. So well did those priests and so well did that administration teach the gospel, I think, to our particular high school, St. Mary's High School in Lancaster, New York, that the respect for diversity back then, when this was not a topic, but it was just instilled by virtue of preaching the gospel, it was so well done that there was. I never was bullied. I never was mocked. I never had those kind of situations that other people, except at the hands of two priests, and you can read about that in the book. And it was not abuse. Mm-hmm. It was calling names. And I think it was because they were sort of in the closet themselves, and they were afraid of themselves, and therefore picking on a kid. Doesn't make any sense, but I talk about one in the book, as a matter of fact, that he called me a terrible name every time he referred to me as a terrible name. Every time he saw me, I said that I hope he doesn't call. He's since gone home to God. I said, I hope that in the kingdom he doesn't call me that name anymore, but he calls me brother. That would be the best. That would be the best thing. I think it's how God reconciles all things himself to bring us all to perfection. But anyway, it's a safe place for a young gay male who loves the church, who loves his faith, and who really, I had a terrific attraction to St. Francis and to Franciscan spirituality and the Franciscan charism. I think I still do, please God. I think that's permeated my entire life. So it sort of made sense to leave after high school and join the conventual Franciscan friars. I made a novitiate at 17 years old. That was sort of before the days of Bill Clinton and Don't Ask, Don't Tell, in the military. And it seemed to be a very good place for a young gay man to flourish, to thrive, and to not have to really deal with one's sexuality or the intersection of spirituality and sexuality. They're good men, terrifically good men, but we never discussed sexuality, So anyway, went to the friars and stayed with them and then left. And my pastor at that time was a very good man, God rest his soul. He was convinced that I should be in a seminary even though I left. And got me into another one. And again, great people. I went to St. Meinrad in Indiana, the Benedictines. Great priests, great people there. Thanks be to God, it was there that I learned how to integrate my sexuality with spirituality at the hands of my spiritual director at St. Meinrad. So they were really integrating holistically in a marvelous fashion way back when.
What does that mean, integrating your faith in your sexuality?
Well, I think we can look at ourselves and, especially anybody can. But I think that we have to I'm trying to boil this down to a 101. I think we have to say, what does my faith propel me to both believe about my sexuality, and what does it propel me to do in acting upon my sexuality? So, everybody knows about the hookup culture, right? Mm-hmm. People are hooking up. That's why we have Grindr and all kinds of things out there. And that's why people get smashed at a bar at 2 a.m. and it's last call, and then it's just hookup city. And I'm not just talking about gay people. I'm talking about straight. I'm talking about anybody, our young people especially. I see it all over the country, and they talk to me about these things. And it's because of poor self-image and all kinds of things that this occurs. So I think if we integrate our faith with our sexuality talks about, our faith talks about the dignity of the human person. So what's more of an assault on your dignity than the hookup culture? I mean, everybody always, I shouldn't say everybody, many people, most people that I talk to feel really poorly about themselves after every hookup, a meaningless hookup.
Mm-hmm.
It's what erodes a person's dignity. And if you, and let's not even talk about hookups. Let's just say that you're a gay person or a straight person, and you are not particularly embracing yourself, exactly who you are, you might turn to alcohol. Just drink a whole lot to sort of cover whatever issues you've got going on at a moment or two. You might be Gucci'd and Louis Vuitton'd up to your earlobes because we think that buying things will satisfy something within us, or will take the pain away from something within us that's unresolved, that we haven't yet come to grasp and come to love about ourselves. When our faith comes in, our faith tells us a couple of things. It tells us, number one, that we're deeply loved by God. Number two, that we have an inherent dignity that no one can take away from us. And number three, that because of those things, there are ways that we use our sexuality, that we use our intellect, that we use our hands, that we use our feet, that we use everything for good, for a higher purpose. So the intersection of our sexuality and our faith talks about how we use the gift of sexuality the best that we can to keep our dignity intact and to somehow or another, bring, this sounds really hokey, bring honor to God
mm-hmm.
by that gift that God's given us. So all this to say that if we are in tune with our faith, if we are in tune with who we are, those two can meet somehow, and we can become better people. And that doesn't happen overnight. I'm still working on it, and I'm near the end of the journey, or getting near that end of that journey, and I'm nowhere near where I probably should be. But yet we become aware of it, and I think then we can become discerning people, where we're constantly discerning, where is God speaking? How is God speaking to me? What is God saying in this situation to me? And that's how I think our faith intersects with our sexuality.
I think that's such a important thing, especially to share with our kids and especially our older kids. As you know, Coming Out and Coming Home is not a book you're going to read to your 5-year-old snuggled up on the couch, but it's certainly a book I think that families should experience together with their older kids, with their kids in high school, college, maybe, and just that whole idea of constantly discerning what it is that God wants me to do with my life at this moment, in this situation. I think that's a lesson that we can all use, no matter who we are, no matter how old we are, no matter where we are in our journey.
Sure. The second part of the book are 40-some stories of where I have found God in my journey home. They're vignettes of my life, whether New York City or Chicago or here, all different stories. The reason I put all those stories in there is for the exact reason that you described, because I intended for this book to be used as a conversation starter in LGBT ministries, in high schools, in grade schools, in college campus ministries, in parishes, in homes, and so forth, where hopefully we're constantly looking for God's presence, and hopefully we're aware of God's interactions with us. I think for many LGBTQ persons who just say to heck with the church, because the church has not been historically very kind or compassionate, has not treated LGBT persons with respect, compassion, and sensitivity like the Catechism calls us to do, I think that calling LGBT persons back home is imperative. High school students, I'm glad you brought that up, high school students and younger students. We have a banner in front of our church you'll read about in the book. It's a big rainbow banner. It says LGBTQ plus Catholics, families, and friends, all are welcome here, or all are welcome. We had a couple of grade school kids and their moms come to the office there at Mary Todd Lincoln's birthplace site there, and I thought they were going to come and complain about that, because we have a very large grade school next to our parish. Well, these two girls came in with their parents, and they were in tears. They were in tears because they said that was the first time these grade school kids felt that the church knew they existed because they saw that sign when they were coming in with their moms in the car toward the school. So they stopped in to say thank you. I think for our young people, if their experience was anything like mine, it's a different world, so maybe their experience isn't much like mine. And maybe it is, I don't know. But if they're not talking about who they are, if the ground is not fertile for them to talk at home or with someone about who they are, that's what I'm seeing all over the country. And it's no surprise how sometimes our young people then turn to drugs, alcohol, sex, charging up the credit cards, things to make them feel better, to make them feel that they're valued because something is not being brought to the surface. Hopefully this book, does bring it to the surface. There's nothing in there that a fifth grader couldn't read with their parents, or a third grader couldn't read with their parents, to find out about maybe who they might be, or maybe they want to talk about their friends. How wonderful is it when we can, and our young people are much more understanding than the Catholics we talked about earlier that might be a little bit more mature in age. Our young people are so much more understanding, but how wonderful it is when we can have those conversations with them to create that journeying with, that accompaniment, that spirit of encounter that can leave the home, that can permeate the church, that can permeate the community by virtue of our straight kids. Having real heart-to-hearts with their parents about their gay counterparts, their gay friends. And how do we treat them? What does the Catechism say? Respect, compassion, and sensitivity. What does that mean for our youth? What does it mean for our youth when we encounter a homeless person? That's one of the stories in my book. Are we seeing God in that homeless person? Are we walking with God? Or are we tossing a few bucks and tossing a hamburger out there and saying, God, you eat this, but I can't be bothered by you? And translate that then into the LGBTQ experience. Can we, as I said in the beginning, can we see God, when we identify God's face, God's heart in that person? So in that LGBT person. So for our young people, I think it's imperative that we have these discussions. I think it's imperative that we not just talk about LGBT issues, but that we talk about discerning where God is in their life. And I think that's what the 40-some stories in the back try to do. Because I know that many of our LGBTQ plus persons are spiritual persons, but they don't want to ascribe to a faith tradition, especially Catholicism at the moment, because of the hurt and because of the pain. When I began the ministry here, did it with a concert on the 1-month anniversary of the Pulse Massacre. And I reached out to the LGBT community here in Lexington. We filled up the church, 700, standing room only, for this concert. And I learned afterwards, a time of fellowship, which was supposed to last about an hour and a half. It lasted till almost 2 a.m, with people telling us their stories. Some people came out to our parking lot, couldn't get out of their car. So hurt were they by the church. They couldn't get out of their car to even walk on our property. I noticed something in the beginning, so I was standing in the back. People were coming into the church and then leaving. I thought, whoa, what's going on? Are they being offended? Are people sitting next to them and saying something awful or whatever? Come to find out that some came into that church, sat down, intended to come to that memorial concert, couldn't stay in there, so hurt were they. You read about one gentleman that I talked to, who now is a very valuable member of the faith community, a Catholic faith community, who was told at his confirmation, when he went to confession, just before confirmation, I told his priest that he thought he was gay. And the priest told him, well then, pal, you better find something else to do on a Sunday morning because you're not welcome here. So for 30 years, this gentleman did not come to the Catholic Church until he saw our outreach ministry, thought he'd give us a try and see if we were authentic, if we were real, or what this was about. And turns out to be a real valuable and loved member of the community. And I think those kind of stories that you'll read about in those books are springboards to lessons. I mean, what is the church always telling us about our youth? That the home is the domestic church. It's a place where it's a cradle of faith. It really is where faith is transmitted to our youth, right? So I think the book that I wrote is a springboard to those conversations, 40-some conversations, and then a conversation about my life. You know, all the things that I talk about in my own journey home, bringing me up to the year 2022, you know, a young person, a child might say, no, I feel like that. I felt like that. And heck, it would be a lot better to have that conversation then than it would be when you're 60 years old. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And you're looking at it and going, my gosh, my whole life, I should have had this conversation. That's what I'm hoping this book does. It opens the doors to conversation so people don't have to be like me. Say, you know, I love this church. And I worked for the church, I ministered in the church for my whole life, didn't come out till 6 years ago. And the interesting thing about this book, I think, is that I'm a gay employee of the Catholic Church. I'm an out gay employee of the Catholic Church. And the foreword of my book was written by my bishop. Now, that, to me, is an incredible gift of grace. Mm-hmm. Because that means that the coming out part, and that only means being who we are, coming out of our closet, coming out of our shell, coming out of our hiding, coming out, whatever you want to say, and then coming home. Where is home supposed to be? Home is supposed to be the church, family of God, the place where God's heart resides among the people, a place where bread is shared in the Eucharist and where the Word of God is broken open. Can we come home to that? And can we come home as who we are? And Bishop John, God bless his ministry, you know, was open enough to write that foreword and to acknowledge that he has an out gay employee that is ministering in his diocese. And hopefully, and it really is sort of humbling, really incredibly humbling when he says nice things about me. Because you can say those nice things about everybody. I think it's sad and it's nice at the same time that it's unique that a bishop could say something nice about a gay employee. I think we need to say that more often. We need to tell our kids they're okay when they come out as gay. We need to tell our parishioners, we love you because you're gay. We love you because you're straight. We love you because you're divorced. We love you because you're married. We love you because you're a mommy, daddy, 2-kid family. We love you because you are 2 mommy, 2 kids. We love you because you're 2 daddy. I mean, can we look at a person and love them like God loves them? That's the question. And if we can, then really we're inviting people to come home as who they are in all their authenticity, exactly how God made them. The first question is, do we believe that's how God made them? Or do we believe ideas that were put into our heads that say, well, no, nobody could be made that way. It's just a fad. It's an unnatural attraction. I think the church has a long way to go to sort of meet up with science and psychology. I think we're getting there. This magisterium, the magisterium of Pope Francis, is calling us to do that more and more. But I think once we do, we're going to see a lot more people coming home as who they are, and I think the church will be that much more a graced community. As I think it was my theology professor at Villanova, Dr. Bernie Prusak, called it the community of the unexpected. That church, the community of the unexpected.
I like that.
Yeah, it's a beautiful image.
And I love that message that we are called, because, you know, we talk here on the podcast about parents being their kids' first and most important teacher. That is true when we're talking about learning how to read, and it's also true, as you mentioned, when it comes to our faith. And our families are the domestic church, and so wonderful if we really help them and allow our kids to help us see Jesus living inside of every single person that we meet. You mentioned that there were a couple of miracles that happened in your life. Can you share one of those miracles?
Yeah, I can share a few of them. You know, I think the biggest miracle was, I shouldn't say that, not the biggest. The biggest miracle is that I'm still alive. I'm a 3-time cancer survivor. They had me dead and buried 20 years ago when I had bladder cancer that went undiagnosed and misdiagnosed for 3 years. So I had cancer in me for 3 years. And then finally they said, oh, that's what this is. And somebody didn't read a file properly and never made a phone call. And they were wheeling me into surgery. And the doctor said to my mom, it's not going to make it. This is bad. This cancer's been in it for 3 years. My mom passed out right there, I'm told. But when they went in, despite all of the films and all of the tests and everything else that they took prior to going in, when they got in there, for some reason, miraculously, that cancer was no different than on the first film 3 years earlier.
Wow.
And you just can't explain it. And I don't want to explain it. That to me gave me sort of a mindset that said, I'm here for a reason. I remember Francis always exhorted his friars, while we have time, let us do good. Well, I was given some more time because I thought I was going to be gone. I think the other greatest miracle, one of the greatest miracles, again, happened after Paul's. I had worked in the Diocese of Orlando for nearly 15 years, so it sort of hit home when Paul's occurred. And I went out on a limb and asked Bishop John if there should be some outreach to LGBTQ plus people here in the Diocese of Lexington. Sort of unheard of because not many people were doing this 7 years ago in many dioceses, at least not actively. And he said, well, JR, do you have a plan? I don't have a plan. I said, well, figure one out, come up with a mission statement, come up with something if you can, and, we can talk about this. Talked about it, had very humble beginnings. You can read about in the book, very humble beginnings. I was happy if just a couple of people would have showed up at St. Paul's and we, brought somebody home, one person home, let somebody know that the church loved them. That was enough. It turned into a huge thing. And then it turned into a diocesan ministry, part of the diocese, Lexington's structure, an LGBT commission. So now the commissioners, myself and all those on the commission, the 7 people on the commission, are appointed by the bishop to do his work. So it's not just us anymore. Then I get a call from a national ministry. It says, would you be our first executive director? Now I find myself traveling all over the country, beyond Africa, Scotland, Poland, all kinds of places with the message and with the spirit of accompaniment to help people to discern, to vision, and then perhaps to start intentional LGBT outreach. That is a miracle because I never saw this on my career path. I never wanted to do this. As a matter of fact, I was much like Jeremiah, I think, when this was all happening. You'll read it in the book. I had no idea what I was doing. I didn't want to do this. I certainly didn't want to get into the firestorm that Father Martin was in. I didn't know him at the time, but I saw what was happening. It was not anything I wanted to have happen in my own life. And you'll read in the book, too, that it does happen in my life. Some of the real ugliness that has just risen to the top because of this ministry that I think is much like what Jesus would do. But I think the miracle here is that I never said, oh, God, I want to start a ministry. Oh, God, I want to start a diocesan ministry. Oh, God, I want to be a national minister, and I want to be traveling around. I want to be talking and helping high schools and colleges and campus ministries and presbyterates and all kinds. I never said any of that. When it was happening, I simply said, all right, Lord, your deal. You open the doors. I'll walk through them. If you can somehow or another give me enough grace to get through it, because I don't know what I'm doing. So here's the miracle. The miracle is that it's successful and that it's doing good all over the place, and I don't know what I'm doing. That's a miracle. But isn't that the gospel that the least are chosen, the broken vessel is the clay feet are always chosen. So that way I can't boast and I can't say, yeah, well, I got the plan. I go into a place, I never tell them what to do. I don't know a parish. I don't know a community. I don't know anything. So I tell them stories. I tell them what's worked. I have ways of helping them vision and discern. And then we discern together. But I've got nothing but stories to share, really. And in that, somehow or another, grace just comes down like a flood. And lives and parishes and dioceses and all kinds of things are transformed. That's a miracle.
That is a miracle. That is a miracle. JR, tell everybody, please, where they can go to find out more about coming out and coming home, and also find out more about you.
Sure. Well, coming out and coming home, I'd ask you, if you're interested in getting it, to go to Butler Books, BUTLER Books.com, and you can purchase it there. You can go to FortunateFamilies.com, and you can see and read about the ministry. Our website, our new website, is just about to be launched, so do not be discouraged when you see the website that's there now, because it's okay, but it's not the dynamic one that's about to be unleashed upon humanity. And you can look at historic St. Paul Catholic Church downtown Lexington. Go to our website. There is an LGBT part of our page. You can see many pictures there and read about LGBT ministry in Lexington there. You can go to the Diocese of Lexington, Kentucky website, and under the Office of Peace and Justice, you can find the link to LGBT outreach. You could Google my name, Zerkowski, and LGBT, and you can find all kinds of things. That you could come to Outreach 2022 at Fordham University in June. A big LGBTQ gathering that Father Martin and Fordham are putting on for people throughout the country. And you can find out more there as well, not just about my book, my work, but again about Father Martin and about people throughout the country that are doing far better things than I'm doing, and far more miraculous things than I'm doing. I'm just trying to do, what I can while I have time. I'm trying to do good, like Francis exhorted.
Well, we've had a really wonderful, enlightening time speaking with the author of Coming Out and Coming Home, Stan J.R. Zerkowski. Hey, Stan, thank you so very much for being with us.
Thank you for having me, and thank you all who are listening for considering what we had to say during this podcast, and for trying to build that church of encounter, that church of accompaniment that Jesus envisioned and that we're called to create.
Please be sure to join us for the next episode of the Reading with Your Kids podcast. Our guest will be Sarah Tucker. She'll be here to celebrate the adventures of Harry and friends. That's the next episode of the podcast. I want to thank the folks who made today's show so wonderful. Of course, we're going to start by thanking our guest, Stan J.R. Zerkowski. Please be sure to check out Coming Out and Coming Home. My team, I want to thank my team, Fatima Khan, Rory Grady, Skylar Strauss. I want to thank my beautiful wife for all the support she gives me. Most of all, we all want to thank you. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you so much for making the world a better place by reading with your kids. I'll be looking for you in the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast.